When Batman Caped Crusader was first announced, we were all told by producer Bruce Timm that this show was going to be more Batman the Animated Series than Batman the Animated Series. And what he meant by that is that now he had the creative freedom to produce the show he had always originally wanted to make, without having to concede to the morals of the television network. One of the things that the team on BTAS were forbidden from doing was showing corrupt city officials, as the network didn't want children's faith in their leaders to be shaken. This meant that Mayor Hamilton Hill, who was deeply corrupt in the comics, was instead ineffectual. Even the city's police department were, for the most part, decent people drowning in a sea of criminality. Aside from Gil Mason, who was a corrupt scumbag, but he was the exception to the rule. This also meant that Detective Harvey Bullock was quite different in the show. I've previously made a video comparing the comic book Bullock to his animated counterpart, and the key takeaway is that while there were hints that Bullock was a brutal cop, overall he was an honourable man that took the responsibility of protecting Gotham and its citizens seriously. The comic book version of Bullock started out as a flunky of Hamilton Hill, whose mission was to discredit Commissioner Gordon and get him fired. Over time, Bullock would change allegiances and become a trusted member of Gordon's squad, with the comic book version becoming more like the BTAS version. But now that the Caped Crusader team were free from these restrictions, they were able to shine the spotlight on Gotham's corruption via the characters of detectives Harvey Bullock and Arnold Flass. And oh boy, this was a controversial decision. As I've already talked about Bullock's origins, and Flass never appeared in Batman the Animated Series because he was so corrupt, I wanted to take a few moments to talk about who Arnold Flass is. Detective Flass first appeared in Frank Miller's seminal Batman Year One story as Detective James Gordon's first partner at the GCPD. Gordon had been transferred to Gotham after he testified against corrupt officials in Chicago, and he was partnered with the towering Flass, perhaps as punishment. Flass had his fingers in all kinds of illegal activities, and as a detective, he was able to flagrantly break the law, taking bribes to look the other way. When Gordon wouldn't involve himself in Flass's illegal acts, Flass and his fellow officers assaulted Gordon to try to teach him a lesson. And he learned a lesson all right. Gordon tracked Flass down, who he had recognised as the lead assailant, and waited until the right moment to strike. Gordon beat Flass senseless, tying him up naked in the woods to teach him a lesson of his own. This led to an uneasy truce between Gordon and the corrupt officers of the GCPD, and for his trouble, Gordon was assigned the impossible high-profile task of bringing in the Batman. The thinking was that Gordon would spectacularly fail, and then there would be grounds to dismiss him. However, Gordon was far more capable than anyone knew, and would go on to work with Batman to clean up the streets of Gotham, including taking down Flass, who then squealed on his superiors in exchange for a lesser prison sentence. Flass would serve his sentence and only return a handful of other times, the first being in 1992's Legends of the Dark Knight Annual 2, where a vengeful Flass ruins the wedding day of Jim Gordon and Sarah Essen by kidnapping Gordon's young son James Jr. The story ended with Flass being sent to prison, but this story has mostly been overshadowed by the more popular alternative story Batman Dark Victory, the sequel to The Long Halloween. In Dark Victory, Flass is seen working as a bouncer at a club before he becomes the victim of the murderous Hangman, which again is a fitting end for a louse like him. He had evaded the proper punishment because he turned on his colleagues, and the Hangman targeted him because he was a traitor. However, in terms of continuity, this is a little bit confusing because Dark Victory took place long before Commissioner Gordon married Sarah Essen, but as with all comic book continuity, just try not to think about it too much. While Flass couldn't be used in Batman the Animated Series primarily because of network rules around not showing police corruption, he was used in more modern on-screen adaptations like Batman Begins and Gotham. Again, he wasn't a major character at all, more of a cog in the system. So that brings us to the version of the characters that we saw in Batman Caped Crusader. Bullock and Flass are partners, and they have free reign over the streets of Gotham City. The first time we see them, they are in the audience at Penguin's Iceberg Lounge, watching Penguin perform at a fundraising event for the GCPD. The first thing to point out is that their version of Flass looks very different. Rather than being a hulking lump of muscle, Flass is leaner and a very flashy dresser. They have switched his ethnicity, likely to avoid unintentionally suggesting that only white people were corrupt. While that may have surprised some people, the most surprising change to the characters is the fact that fan favourite Harvey Bullock is just as corrupt as Flass. I find it interesting that Bullock wears the same clothes as his BTAS counterpart. Every character that previously appeared in BTAS got a distinct redesign in Caped Crusader, except for Bullock. It's almost as if they were trying to lull us into a false sense of security before pulling the rug out from underneath us. From the outset, it's very clear to us that this version of Harvey Bullock is not the same as any of the versions we'd seen before. When the Penguin is betrayed by her son, it's Bullock that calls Penguin to inform her, which results in the destruction of the police station. When the alarm rings, Bullock is one of the first people out the door, leaving behind a suspect handcuffed to his desk. This blatant disregard for the woman's life is genuinely shocking, but as the series progresses, we will see him do even more terrible things. When the pair catch Catwoman, that's a bit generous of me to say that, it's more like they picked her up after Batman had tied her up. They were astonished to see her walk free after District Attorney Harvey Dent decided to be lenient with her. Catwoman had earlier slashed Bullock's face with her claws, which calls to mind the injury she inflicted on crime boss Carmine Falcone in the comic books, but the fact that she walked despite being caught red-handed embarrasses Bullock and Flass. As such, they decide to murder her to reassert their authority and soothe their fragile egos. Batman had his own plan for capturing the Catwoman, involving getting a photographer to take pictures of her committing the crime, but that also backfired. These pictures only told half the story. They showed Bullock and Flass trying to arrest Catwoman before Batman intervened and beat them up. And this garners them a lot of sympathy with the public. Oh, those poor policemen were only trying to do their job, when that mean old Batman beat them up for no good reason. It's also worth noting that Bullock's injury mirrors the comic book Flass's injuries after his first encounter with Batman in Year 1. In response to the public outcry, Mayor Jessup establishes an anti-Batman task force, which Commissioner Gordon assigns to Renee Montoya. Bullock and Flass wanted to lead the task force, but Commissioner Gordon won't give them the power because he knows what kind of cops they are. When Montoya's efforts to capture Batman fail, echoing Jim Gordon's failed attempts at capturing Batman in Year 1, Flass and Bullock take matters into their own hands after an inspiring talk from Dr. Harleen Quinzel. Dr. Quinzel cannily points out that Batman responds to other costumed folks, so Flass decides to unleash a costumed villain of his own. They take the arsonist, who refers to himself as Firebug, and deliberately let him go in the poor part of town, the East End, so that he can start some fires and draw Batman's attention. They don't care about the lives they're ruining by unleashing him on that neighbourhood. In fact, they care so little they just stand by and watch the buildings burn, waiting for Batman to turn up. Once he arrives, they take a small team of officers into the building, directly defying Commissioner Gordon, not to rescue any trapped civilians, but to try to capture Batman. Batman easily evades them, but they do stumble across Firebug, who surrenders after running out of fuel for his flamethrower. However, Flass fears that Firebug will tell the other officers how he escaped from their custody, and it would bring an end to their careers. Bullock's response to this fear is to draw his gun and murder Firebug. Once again, fortune favours them, as E.L. O'Brien is there to capture the moment. And the story these pictures tell is that the two hero cops risked their lives to kill the crazed arsonist. While other versions of Harvey Bullock were rough around the edges, maybe they got a bit too hands-on with suspects, they would never resort to murder. This scene makes it clear to us that this version of Bullock is an irredeemable monster. Bullock and Flass are given control of the anti-Batman squad by Mayor Jessup, but it's worth noting that the squad doesn't actually do anything of note throughout the rest of the series, indicating Bullock and Flass's inadequacy. When a hit is placed on Gordon, Bullock and Flass offer to unleash their task force on the people of the East End, crack some skulls and see what info leaks out. But this is unacceptable to Commissioner Gordon. I did find it interesting that Bullock and Flass aren't seen trying to cash in on the hit. They're corrupt, but they have rules. A civilian trying to take out a cop is unacceptable. Even if the cop is one they don't like, he's still their boss. Although having said that, I can't rule out the possibility that they were the ones that informed Onomatopoeia of Jim Gordon's whereabouts. They don't seem to have any rules about moonlighting though. Later in the series we see them acting as gangster Rupert Thorne's flunkies. When Harvey Dent goes on a murderous rampage of revenge, Bullock calls Thorne to let him know that Dent has killed his henchman and is making his way to Thorne. After Dent was apprehended and offered a deal to testify against the corrupt officials within Gotham, Bullock and Flass break Dent out of prison with the intentions of handing him over to Thorne. Along the way, Dent provides a scathing assessment of Bullock and Flass's relationship. He claims that he had always assumed that Bullock was the one in charge, but now that he thinks about it, it's obvious that Flass is the one pulling the strings. Whenever there's dirty work to be done, Bullock is the one that has to get his hands dirty. That way, if they're ever caught, Flass can always feign ignorance and pass the blame to Bullock. This provokes a very violent reaction in Flass, likely because Dent hit a nerve, which grants Dent the opportunity to escape. Flass and Bullock then joined Thorne's men in hunting Dent at the docks, although Dent has backup in the form of Barbara Gordon, Commissioner Gordon, Renee Montoya, and the Batman. Bullock and Flass split up in order to get the drop on Barbara and Dent, although Bullock gets caught in the act by Commissioner Gordon. Flass, meanwhile, is more successful as he attempts to shoot Barbara. Dent throws himself between Barbara and Flass and is killed by the bullet to the back. So much for Flass never getting his hands dirty, eh? This leads to one of the more powerful scenes in Caped Crusader's first season. Batman was unable to save Dent, but he arrives just in time to stop Flass from shooting Barbara, and his reaction to Dent's death is frankly astonishing. Batman picks up Flass's gun, and for a brief moment it looks like Batman is about to execute him, much in the same way that Bullock had killed Firebug and Flass had killed Dent. Rather than shooting Flass, he instead shoots around him, indicating that he could have killed Flass if he wanted to. Instead, Batman wanted to scare Flass before knocking him unconscious and leaving him in Commissioner Gordon's custody. The last we hear of Bullock and Flass comes during one of Rupert Thorne's phone calls. Thorne tells his contact to tell them to keep their mouths shut and he will ensure they go free. He also congratulates them on a job well done. Bullock and Flass acted as our first-hand look at the corruption at the heart of Gotham City. These two were utterly reprehensible, yet through dumb luck they always managed to come out on top. Still, getting caught red-handed, trying to murder a key witness and his lawyer, the daughter of their boss no less, may be enough to send them down the river once and for all. But in a city like Gotham, there are no guarantees they won't somehow come out of this smelling like roses, as they had done after their interactions with Catwoman and Firebug. When I found out that Bullock and Flass were going to be partners, I was interested in seeing how the dynamic between them may work, with one cop being a rough cop and the other one being a completely corrupt cop. However, these two were thick as thieves, and making Bullock a murderer was an incredibly bold choice. I find myself wondering if there isn't a chance of redemption, especially for Bullock. Yes, he murdered Firebug in cold blood, but you could argue that he was manipulated into doing it by the conniving Flass. I think we can all agree that Flass is pretty irredeemable, but can the same be said of Bullock? As I noted at the start of the video, the comic book version of Harvey Bullock wasn't always a trusted confidant of Commissioner Gordon. He was downright hostile at first, but things turned around. Can the same be said of Caped Crusader's Bullock? I have my doubts. But maybe we'll find out for sure in Season 2. Okay, that's it for this video essay. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, all the usual YouTube stuff. If you'd like to hear more about Batman Caped Crusader, why not check out our podcast Totally Shway Flipside, where my wife and I have gone through all 10 episodes. This is a spoiler-filled conversation about each episode in sequential order, so only check this out if you've watched the show or if you have no intentions of ever watching it yourself. I offer channel memberships for $1.99 a month, which will grant you early access to my video essays, and some supplementary perks like custom emojis, priority responses to your comments, members-only videos, and community posts. And special thanks to my current channel members, who are all listed on the screen right now. Next time I'm going to talk about the man himself, Caped Crusader's Batman, and shine the spotlight on how this weird, damaged man found himself while on a mission to punish all of Gotham City's wrongdoers. Hope to see you then.